Okay, so I'll start broadcasting.
Can I tell Axel to start?
No, wait 1 second.
No, not yet.
I don't see anything.
What?
A very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this OECD webinar with the title, What Really Motivates Anti-Corruption Compliance? My name is Axel. I'm editor-at-large at Reuters based out of London, and I'm thrilled to have been asked back to moderate this fascinating and important discussion. Allow me a few brief words to set the scene and to explain how the next 90 minutes will run, and then we'll get going with the program. Our aim today is to examine what motivates companies to implement anti-corruption compliance programs, the challenges in implementing those programs, and what companies want governments and international organizations, etc., to do to help them. Of course, understanding why companies put such programs in place, or indeed not, can help policymakers better understand the playing field and promote the spread of effective compliance systems. It would, of course, be remiss of me not to mention the heightened risk of corruption sparked by the global pandemic, given the new financial pressures faced by many companies. Indeed, the crisis has made discussion of this subject and what can be done to help more important than ever. All of these topics are covered in a new OECD study published today entitled Corporate Anti-Corruption Compliance Drivers, Mechanisms, and Ideas for Change. This is a study that draws on desk research, an extensive survey of over 100 companies and interviews with key players, and will form the basis of today's discussion. In just a moment, we'll hear opening remarks from the government of Sweden, which financed the OECD study. Those will be followed by some brief comments from the OECD's Deputy Secretary General. We'll then get a more detailed presentation of the report's key findings, and then I'll open our panel discussion up, during which you'll all have plenty of opportunity to ask your own questions and indeed air your own views in a series of polls. We have 3 polls that we intend to run today, so we can gauge, if you like, how you feel about all of these issues. To ask questions, use the Zoom chat function, and the polling should be pretty straightforward. You'll see that pop up, and I'll guide you as we go through that. Enough from me for now. It gives me great pleasure to hand over to Anna Hallberg, Sweden's Minister of Foreign Trade and Nordic Affairs. Minister, the virtual floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you today at this important webinar. I'm proud that Sweden has given support to this study in the fight against corruption and to be able to participate at today's launch of the new OECD study on corporate anti-corruption, compliance drivers, mechanisms, and ideas for change. Multilateralism is under severe pressure today and is being challenged globally by both nationalism and populism. It is therefore extremely important to secure and to stand up for international cooperation and important, well-functioning multilateral organizations such as the OECD. Therefore, I'm pleased to be able to nominate Cecilia Malmström as a candidate for the post of Secretary General of the OECD. With her solid competence from international context and recognized good leadership qualities, she's extraordinarily well suited to run the organization further. For more than half a century, the OECD has promoted policies aiming to improve economic and social well-being around the world. Sweden is amongst the states that have ratified the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, and we are actively engaged in the fight against corruption. The OECD Good Practice Guidance is also one of the key guidelines for businesses with regards to the effectiveness of the company's internal controls, ethics, and compliance programs. OECD will provide us with valuable insights from the study. With us to share their experiences, we have the representatives from the private sector, the civil society, and the government. Today, we are facing immense challenges with COVID-19, a global health, economic, and social crisis. The pandemic is a test of societies, of governments, of communities and individuals, and of companies, and a stress test for international sustainable business. Let me first state that despite the difficulties, there are opportunities. But we need to work together to handle the risks involved and fight corruption. Today's webinar focuses on the way forward and can inspire us all. The study states that 120 out of 130 companies had an anti-corruption policy, so there is a clear intention to combat misconduct. But there are many challenges on the way forward. First of all, we need a conducive environment in form of good governance, rule of law, and to work against corruption in society. Second of all, companies need resources, training, and promotion of the compliance function to detect corruption and bribery. SMEs could face particular challenges in this regard. The study underlines the need of leadership. I could not agree more. I spent almost my entire life in the business sector before I was appointed Sweden's Minister for Foreign Trade and Nordic Affairs. I'm here today because Sweden's government has a strong commitment to fight corruption and to promote international sustainable business. Less than 1 year ago, the Swedish government presented a new platform for international sustainable business. The platform was launched with an expressed expectation for Swedish companies to act sustainably and responsibly by working for human rights, gender equality, good working conditions, the environment, the climate, and to combat corruption in the daily operations around the world. Let me share with you some key areas for the Swedish government's work. I will start with corruption. For the Swedish government, the fight against corruption and bribery is key to sustainable development and the fulfillment of the Agenda 2030. Corruption is devastating for the business sector and for societies. Companies are less interested in investing in countries or regions with widespread corruption. This blocks economic development and undermines democracy. Corruption occurs more or less everywhere, and it has significant impacts to the economy. Corruption reduces trust and the level of foreign direct investments. As a trade export-oriented country, exports are crucial to Sweden's welfare. It creates jobs, growth, and it increases our competitiveness. There is a huge loss of value in world trade today because of corruption. The extra cost, often named facilitation cost, is put on citizens, companies, and consumers. Another area is global value chains. Global value chains are a key component of the globalized economy, and they must be sustainable in all the parts. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. In a global trade, a chain of production can only be considered responsible and sustainable if it's so every step of the way. Furthermore, I would like to underline the need for enhanced social dialogue globally. In 2016, the Swedish Prime Minister initiated the Global Deal, a multi-stakeholder partnership now hosted by the OECD in collaboration with ILO. The Global Deal seeks to promote social dialogue and sound industrial relations as means to foster decent working conditions and inclusive growth. Social dialogue is a key to success, and it's not a fairy tale. Social dialogue is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. Because it's possible to make globalization work for everyone: businesses, workers, societies. Workers win improved conditions, businesses win increased stability and competent workers, societies win economic growth. And by doing this, by creating partnership, we will not just be ready for a changed labor market, not just be ready for new times and globalization, we will all profit from it. Furthermore, I would like to argue that there is a clear business case for social dialogue, which has the potential to serve as a productive input to enterprises and contribute to inclusive growth. Sustainability reporting is also key. Businesses have to report their non-financial achievements on a yearly basis. The EU demands sustainability reporting for all companies having more than 500 employees. We have strengthened this requirement in our national legislation. In Sweden, we require all companies having 250 employees or more to provide a sustainable development report. This was important to spark change and awareness in an initial phase. But today, many Swedish businesses are proactive and have placed sustainability in the core business model. They understand that it's a key aspect if you want to be a business leader of tomorrow, and it is often an integrated part of the business model. They now have extensive sustainability reporting beyond legislation requirements to boost the company's business and shareholder value. A sustainable business sector with a fight against corruption as a cornerstone is absolutely necessary for any country's future welfare. In just a few minutes, we will receive a thorough presentation of the study by the OECD Secretariat, why I won't take the time to dig deeper into the details of the study. However, I'm confident that the study, laying out suggestions for companies that want to improve their anti-corruption compliance program, as well as proposals for governments and organizations on how to better assist the companies, will provide an essential input in the fight against corruption. There is no question that there should be zero tolerance for corruption and bribery. It does not matter whether it's called petty or grand, it is still an obstacle for economic growth and sustainable business. But it takes two to tango. That's why it's so important that we do this collectively, government and businesses. We must have a good governance. At the same time, it is up to you and me, to each individual, to take our responsibility. To conclude, yes, there are major challenges ahead. However, we do see positive trends. There is a lot to be accomplished if we keep fighting for this common cause. With those words, I would once again wish you all very welcome to this webinar, and I sincerely hope that the outcome of the same will be fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Hallberg from Sweden, for your opening remarks there. Already plenty of food for thought, and apologies, by the way, for that temporary connection issue. Hopefully you didn't miss too much of that. Let me move swiftly on. I give the floor now to Jeffrey Schlagenhauth, the OECD's Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Just to double check here. Great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where the participants are around the world. I see we've topped 800 participants at this point showing on my screen. I think that shows the interest in this subject. I hope that you're all keeping safe and well, managing to stay positive in these unsettling times. Let me thank all of you for joining us in this exclusive webinar. I would like to extend a special thank you to the government of Sweden and Minister Hallberg for supporting the OECD's work on anti-corruption, particularly the new studies that we are launching today, corporate anti-corruption compliance drivers, mechanisms, and ideas for change, which we'll be focusing on during this webinar, as well as tackling bribe solicitation using the high-level reporting mechanism and foreign bribery and the role of intermediaries, managers, and gender. We come together in an extremely challenging time. The ongoing pandemic has rapidly permeated every aspect of our lives, unsettling our democracies, our economies, and our societies. This has created conditions in which corruption can thrive. With companies under enormous financial pressure to recover, anti-corruption compliance departments and systems around the world are being put under a real stress test. Yet even prior to COVID-19, corruption remained one of the most pressing challenges of our time. with much more needing to be done on this front. In Ernst & Young's 2018 Global Fraud Survey, 38% of respondents stated that bribery and corrupt practices happen widely in business in their country. That's the same level as 2012. In emerging countries, this figure jumps to 52%. But let's not forget that anti-corruption compliance was a topic of interest in a limited number of countries just a few years ago. The OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, thanks to the efforts of the Working Group on Bribery, has fundamentally changed the business environment for companies and been a catalyst for stronger anti-bribery compliance frameworks in line with the OECD good practice guidance on internal controls, ethics, and compliance. At the regional level, our anti-corruption initiatives have been pioneering business integrity work across Africa, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, the Middle East and North Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, as well as in Southeast Asia. And we have some exciting projects in the pipeline, such as newly developed anti-corruption performance indicators for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which include specific business integrity indicators. Companies can, of course, play a role in furthering corruption. The OECD Foreign Bribery Report revealed that over 40% of foreign bribery cases involve management-level employees either paying or authorizing bribes. But companies can also lead the way in fighting this harmful practice. Our 2017 report on the detection of foreign bribery showed that 23% of foreign bribery cases that resulted in definitive sanctions over the last 20 years were detected via self-reporting by companies. Yet many corporations across the globe, notably SMEs, continue to face challenges in implementing a compliance program that functions effectively in practice. Which is why I hope that today's discussion with our excellent lineup of panelists, informed by the exciting new OECD study on corporate anti-corruption compliance drivers, mechanisms, and ideas for change, will help us to better understand why companies choose to expend the time and resources to build up an anti-corruption program embedded in their organization. Better identify what challenges compliance officers still face today to accomplish this. Better incentivize the private sector's compliance, and ultimately, better the effectiveness of compliance programs. Corruption's a moving target, and this webinar comes at a critical juncture as we undergo a review of the OECD anti-bribery recommendation to ensure that it continues to respond to the ever-evolving challenges of fighting foreign bribery. I therefore hope that today's discussions can help us as we work on upgrading our instruments to improve business conduct and practices. I wish all of you a fruitful discussion today and look forward to delving into these issues. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, for your comments. I'm already seeing a lot of questions coming through on the chat function. Do keep those coming in. And when we start the panel, I'll get as many of them as I can to our panelists. Just before we get a little bit more of a deep dive into the report, I want to present our first audience polling question, if I may. To participate in this, just click on the answers in the polling frame that has appeared, should have appeared already on your screen. This is the first question. What are the main reasons a company adopts an anti-corruption compliance program? If you could pick three responses, please, from the list there, and I will bring you the result in just a short while. In fact, I'm going to bring you that result just after we've heard from our next speaker. So whilst I'm introducing her, fill out that poll if you could. France Chain is a senior legal analyst in the OECD's anti-corruption division. France will present some of the key findings from the study. France, let me hand the floor over to you now. You have to unmute yourself, France.
Yeah, thank you, Axel. Sorry about that. So thank you very much, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are indeed in the world. I hope you can all see the slides that are up now on the screen. Yes, it seems that's the case. It's a great opportunity. It's an honor for me on behalf of the Anti-Corruption Division to present this study on the anti-corruption compliance drivers, mechanisms, and ideas for change. And I too would like to extend our thanks to the government of Sweden for their generous support of this study. In it, we looked at why companies adopt anti-corruption compliance mechanisms. We looked at how companies assess their corruption risks and develop compliance systems. And we did this with an eye towards encouraging more companies, including small and medium-sized enterprises, to adopt such measures, and also with an eye towards informing policymaking on how to incentivize anti-corruption compliance. The study was largely developed based on a survey of 130 companies from nearly 30 countries and interviews as well. The companies that participated are generally large multinational companies, of which about 10% are state-owned, but we also had about 50% in the sample that were small and medium-sized enterprises. All the respondents are involved in business internationally. They represent a broad variety of industries, as you can see in the figure. Often they represent more than one industry, and these range from healthcare to manufacturing, transport, energy, finance, and so on. I will, of course, due to time issues, focus only on certain parts of the study here today. That is to say, the main drivers that push companies to adopt compliance programs, the challenges they still face today, and then I'll try and highlight some possible ways forwards for companies, for governments, for the international community at large. And of course, I invite you to read the full study, which is already available online, and needless to say, to participate actively in the discussions that will follow this presentation. So, why do companies adopt anti-corruption compliance measures? We asked companies about the primary reason, of course, but naturally the decision to decide to establish a compliance program can be multifaceted. The first reason that came up in responses was a concern about enforcement. About 80% said that was their major factor in their decision to establish the program, which I think is really interesting. And it is also greatly linked to a desire to protect the company's reputation. Now, these concerns regarding reputation, regarding enforcement, they can take different forms. Of course, where a company itself comes under investigation, they will almost certainly establish a compliance program to avoid similar incidents, to obtain credit in sentencing, and to restore operations as well as faith in the company. But an interesting secondary factor is the bystander effect. This is how we've called it. Enforcement and reputational concerns can often arise when watching similarly situated companies face investigations. And for instance, one survey respondent said they'd established their program watching other companies being prosecuted and learning from their mistakes. With respect to very widespread prosecutions across the globe, very widely reported ones, this is also has a very strong awareness raising effect. And for instance, there was a representative of a Latin American company who explained that the Odebrecht case had been a wake-up call for South American and Latin American companies. And this is a situation reminiscent of the Siemens case that was concluded in 2008, which had similar effect possibly here in Europe. Of course, internal motivations were raised as a significant issue, a desire to memorialize a firm culture, to do the right thing. But perhaps more interesting was the fact that many companies decide to establish an anti-corruption program to be in a stronger position vis-a-vis customers or investors. About 40% of respondents said they established such a program with an interest to obtain government contracts, but an even greater number, 50%, said that it was due to their interaction with non-governmental actors. And they explained that, for instance, they had requirements to that effect from joint venture partners, investors, or majority shareholders. And this sort of pressure from the supply chain can be a particularly strong incentive for SMEs because they want to keep doing business, keep having business relationships with large companies. And therefore, the encouragements they receive, sometimes the requirements they receive from larger companies can be a really strong factor. Two additional factors, interestingly, that came out through comments and interviews are, one, changes in legislation. Of course, if the law requires you to have a compliance program, you will have one. This came through in responses notably from French companies who referred to the Loi Sapin II and also from a number of Colombian companies who referred to the Ley Anti-Soborno, which was introduced in 2016. Changes in activities, in business activities, can also lead to changes in compliance. A US company said they were considering acquiring a company in Latin America, and this brought them to undertake a corruption risk analysis. Another company, a state-owned enterprise, said they established their compliance program when deciding to sell stock because they wanted to convey confidence to potential investors, both locally and internationally. So that's for a quick look at the drivers of change. And now I'll turn to the challenges that compliance officers still tell us they face today to make compliance effective. And the first factor that's a challenge is that it will never happen to us. A lot of the respondents were obviously compliance officers, and they said in 60% of cases, they had to fight a perception in their company that a compliance program was just not needed. And this often comes down to the fact that corruption risks are intangible. Well, they're intangible until an incident occurs. And how do you change the perception? Well, often you have to start by educating the organization's leadership. And this may seem surprising in 2020, but yes, still today, over 60% of respondents said that executive commitment remains a challenge. And when they were discussing this item, they also said that even when you have an executive team truly committed to anti-corruption compliance, well, you need staff who trust management decisions about the company in general, but about the compliance program as well. And one company representative said, it's very important that senior managers lead by example. People are more engaged and committed if they trust their leaders. And I'll come back to that because it goes way beyond the company as well. Adequate resources, of course, they continue to be critical. And again, the problem here is that compliance is seen as a cost center, and obtaining resources can be difficult. The risk is that you see corruption as a potential threat, whereas on the other hand, the risk of losing business is a much more immediate and concrete threat. And this challenge of resources, it can be particularly acute for SMEs because they cannot spread, of course, the cost of developing, of implementing a compliance program across as large a business. And this is closely intertwined with the pressure to make profits. And several interviewees explained that this pressure is often at odds with the importance of a compliance program. And one compliance officer said he wished they could kill the bonuses because they inherently conflict with ethics. While another, perhaps more moderate one, said that he thought that key performance indicators should include anti-bribery compliance. For large organizations, routing the program worldwide can also be a significant challenge. They have to adapt the program to local needs. They have to overcome possible cultural hurdles. And they have to go, of course, beyond the organization, but also convey the program to third parties because we all know how much of a risk they can represent in a business transaction. And finally, and perhaps a more sort of topical challenge, and one I'd like to spend a minute on, is the importance of maintaining momentum. Once you've got the program in place, once possibly you have certification, because that's also the sort of the new holy grail, is compliance done? And I think that's one thing that came out through the interviews we had. The compliance officer says, we're not done, we're never done. One said, now we have the ISO certification, everyone seems relaxed. That's not acceptable to me. And another shared, I don't want to hear my boss saying we are done. The program is continuously growing and the program is never done. We keep improving, finding new and better solutions. So following this very brief overview of some of the strategies and concerns businesses have voiced, I will conclude by attempting to distill some key findings and suggestions that may help companies and the international community to more effectively fight corruption by supporting anti-corruption compliance. So first of all, what does compliance need? Well, of course, compliance needs a seat at the management table in the form of appropriate executive support and autonomy. It also needs a compliance culture, which of course includes clear standards and their implementation, but also very regular and clear and loud communication to demonstrate to all members of the corporation that you are serious about your commitment to integrity. It also means working together. A central team in headquarters can only do so much to enforce a global compliance program, and you need to rely on local personnel on the ground who know local risks, who have built relationships of trust within and beyond the organization. They're essential teammates in building and maintaining your compliance program. And then, of course, beyond the company, Businesses can engage with others to exchange best practices with others in their industry or in their geographical area. There can be opportunities for collective action at the industry level or in the context of a particular large procurement contract. And of course, they can work through business associations to create standards of expectations for compliant conduct. And all of this will be extremely helpful in bringing together SMEs for discussions of anti-corruption compliance issues. As for companies, well, many of them would like to see support for their efforts or increased support for their efforts in the form of government commitment. That's to say timely enforcement, but also strengthening the rule of law and trust in the rule of law. Companies also generally support the adoption of clear legislative requirements for compliance, but I also stress that these should be flexible so that they can adapt the programs to their needs. And finally, companies continue to want assistance, and that can be notably in the form of incentives for compliance. At a minimum, companies would like an effective compliance program to be recognized as a defense in legal proceedings. But very often they go further than that, and they also would like government to provide positive incentives to virtual companies, as is done in other areas, such as for companies that adopt green technologies. And these incentives can take the form of tax incentives, rebates, or even just public accolades for anti-corruption efforts. And then very concretely, assistance can take the form of providing analytical tools to companies, such as those that help assess corruption risks, or those that can help companies demonstrate the concrete and very financial benefits of anti-corruption compliance programs. The international community and international organizations like the OECD can also help respond to these demands by educating and assisting companies. This is something that developing learning is something that we care about very much here at the OECD. And we strive to continue to do that, including through case studies like the one being discussed today, like other studies that were mentioned by Deputy Secretary General earlier today. And discussing these in real format or in virtual format, as we tend to do these days, is also very important. We can also help break down silos because compliance personnel are dealing with antitrust requirement, they're dealing with money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, environmental concern, human rights, and just naming a few. And looking for ways to create synergies between these different compliance areas can really help advance compliance globally. And finally, the international community can take steps to support and even participate in collective action efforts to fight corruption. So in conclusion, many companies seem to keenly, at least those who responded to the survey, are really engaged in the fight against corruption, but they don't want to fight it alone. They want to see governments walking the talk by supporting corporate anti-corruption efforts with appropriate incentives, by enforcing their laws effectively, and themselves operating with the highest standards of integrity. And importantly, companies stress that the awareness raising part is not over. We need to continue doing it. And international stakeholders, they can help in educating communities at all levels about the harms of corruption and the steps to guard against it. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I turn back over to you, Axel, for what promises to be a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, France. Excellent. All things we're going to be discussing, as you said, shortly in our panel. And your comments and your slides have prompted plenty of questions. Again, we will get to as many of those as we can. A number of viewers, plenty of viewers asking if they could get their hands on the slides as well. I'm sure the OECD, if you put that in writing in the chat room to the OECD, they will be in touch with all of you who want to get those slides. Let's take a look at the results before we start this panel, the results of the first poll question that I asked. Here you go. The question was, what are the main reasons a company adopts an anti-corruption program? And it's no great surprise here, having heard what Francis just said and what the report came up with, that protecting the company from reputational damage is up the top there with 74. Avoiding prosecution at 65%. Again, no great surprise there. Improving how the company is run, 26% interesting, and winning business from government at 29%. So interesting results from you, but really do mirror what we've been hearing, of course, from France and what came out of that study. So thank you very much indeed for your responses to that polling question. We will do another poll shortly. Let's begin the panel discussion. It's going to be split up into those three areas that we've just heard of, the reasons for programs, the compliance programs, the challenges when implementing them, and then how governments, international organizations, civil society can help. As I said, do submit your questions through the Zoom chat function. You can inform us of any technical issues you're having as well. If I could ask you to submit questions that correspond to the topic, the section being discussed, that will make things a lot easier for us to respond to those as we go along, and I'll get to as many of those as I can. Let me introduce the panel. Alma Balcazar is co-founder and principal of GR Compliance and a member of the International Council of Transparency International. Welcome to you, Alma. Andrew Gentin is an assistant chief with the US Department of Justice Criminal Division Fraud Section. Good to see you, Andrew. Corinne Lagache chairs BIAC, the Anti-Corruption Committee for Business at the OECD, and is Senior Vice President, Group Compliance Officer at French multinational Safran. And finally, Caroline Lindgren is Head of Legal and Local Compliance Officer of Sweco Sverige, the Swedish consultancy. So a healthy mix, I think, representing business, enforcement, and international oversight. Welcome to all of you. Discussion round one, factors motivating anti-corruption compliance. Let me start with the businesses represented. So Corinne and Caroline, to you. 81% said avoiding prosecution was at the top of the list. 89% said protecting reputation. Does that, is that what you see within your own company? Is that what you see with companies you do business with? And does it surprise you? Caroline, let me start with you.
Thanks, Axel. No, it does not surprise me at all. That is actually what I believe as well. You need to feel a sense of urgency, and a very good way of feeling that sense of urgency is feeling a risk of getting prosecuted if you do not do that. So I'm not surprised.
Yeah. How about you, Corinne? Same response from you. And let me ask you, I guess rather cynically, are these the right reasons?
Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay. That doesn't surprise me either, but nevertheless, I think it's a question of maturity of companies. When companies have implemented a compliance program for years, then of course the risk of prosecution is one risk, but I think these companies as really beyond this point. For them, it's really not only to act in line with the rules and regulation, it's mainly also to get a strategic investment, competition advantage against competitors, sometimes, trust of their stakeholders. We are, when you are a multinational company, even though you are smaller, you are all the time a question about your citizenship, your integrity, in order to keep the trust of your stakeholders. Also within the stakeholders, the employees. And I think it's we have to go, many companies see also the opportunity to assess their real risk in terms of business and to allocate with adequacy their resources. For many companies such as Safran, I think it's not only companies, of course, company reputation, but we think that is a competitive advantage.
Okay, good. Have changes, Corinne, in the laws made a difference? France mentioned Sapin 2 in France, or when Colombia joined the OECD again. Have changes in the law changed the context for companies?
Again, it depends on the company. If you are a local company with the you know, the level in terms of the size, in terms of employees and turnover, which is considered by Sapin 2 law in order to implement compliance program, you have to, and maybe it's more an obligation. If you are working at the international level, Sapin 2 law is a very good thing, but that aligns the French regulation to the FCPA, UK Bribery Act, in order to create a certain level playing field in the requirements. But I'm sure that many companies didn't wait for Sapin 2 in order to align. Nevertheless, for French company, this is a very good thing because that gives some guidelines, you know, in order to prevent appropriately the risks.
Sure. Alma, I'll come to you in just a second, but Andrew, let me just ask you this first. If enforcement and fear of reputational damage remain the main drivers for these programs, does that mean there should be more enforcement and not less? Is that the way forward, Andrew?
Thanks, Axel. Let me just start out by thanking Franz Chain for the study. I mean, the OECD puts out a lot of these studies, and I think this one's particularly good because it does rely on companies' responses. So thanks, Franz. So Axel, I think that's a tough question. I think from an academic standpoint, the answer is yes. No, but of course, when we bring actions, compliance is not the only factor we look at in bringing enforcement actions. What we're really trying to do is deter conduct. So at least under the US system, compliance is a factor under our corporate enforcement policy, but it's certainly not the main reason that we would bring an action. Our primary goal is to, you know, we have criminal conduct that comes to us, and our primary goal is to counter that. But certainly with our corporate enforcement policy and other policies, motivating anti-corruption is a nice byproduct.
Actually, a question, Andrew, now for you, now and we're with you, and again, Alma, I'll come to you in a second, a question from the audience. Is it possible to introduce criminal liability of legal entities for corruption offences without establishing clear anti-corruption compliance legislation?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think it's a little bit difficult for me to answer in the US because we do have kind of advanced law in this area, but I think the answer is yes. I mean, this may not be exactly what the questioner is asking for, but, you know, a lot of countries are exploring a compliance defense. In the US, we do not have that. We don't think it's a great idea. We think that's kind of a baseline that companies would use. At least in the United States, we like to see compliance systems evolve over time. So what we've done with our corporate enforcement policy is really include compliance and remediation in our enforcement program. So there is no compliance defense in the United States. And what we found that you know, this has really raised this has really raised how companies view compliance. And you know, they know what the DOJ policies are, and they know we're constantly looking at them. And just, you know, I think in France, as you know, the AFA goes out there and looks at companies' compliance programs. And I think that's also really positive because it's continuous. It's not a one-time certification type thing. You know, they're constantly going back and looking at them. And I think we try to do the same thing in the United States.
Sure. All right. Alma, let me bring you in here. I know you want to talk about a particular public-private initiative, I believe in Brazil and Colombia, to recognize companies that voluntarily submit programs for independent valuation. Tell us about that program, that initiative, and do you think that is something that we could see more widespread? You need to unmute your microphone, Alma. There we go.
Okay. Yes. Let me refer to this initiative, which is led by the Brazilian government and was created through a very well-known public-private alliance with representation from government and important business associations. It's an interesting model, international recognized, as you say, was replied already in Colombia. The companies that pass the evaluation can be in the list. Yeah, it's a kind of a wide list. And among the reasons why companies feel attracted in being part of it are to be in a well-known club of good practices, to count with the recognition endorsed by the government. It is a demanding evaluation. To give you a sample, in the last year in Brazil, 373 companies applied to the evaluation process, of which around 220 complete the whole process, but only 26 companies were approved to enter into the list. The list is also recognized for the high level, technical level, and the independence of the evaluation process. To ensure it, companies do not have to pay to subscribe and to be evaluated. Once companies become part of the list, they must periodically undergo a new evaluation to remain in it. The public disclosure of the list is also an important recognition for companies that approve the evaluation. The creation of parallel incentives to be at the list, for example, being on the list might facilitate access to export credits, or it might give additional points to compete on public purchases, or it might help to shorter custom procedures. As you can see, this is an approach to combine different factors to foster a culture of business integrity.
Thank you very much indeed, Alma. And it's very quickly, Andrew, from what Alma's just described, is this something you imagine we could see and we should have a little bit more widespread?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on how it's done. I think some countries do it better than others. I think, you know, Colombia seems to do it very well, but I think the danger with any type of certification process, like I mentioned before, is that it's a one-time thing. You want, just as compliance programs themselves need to constantly evolve and improve. That's what the government wants to see. So I think, you know, a one-time certification is not going to cut it, at least with the U.S. government when we're evaluating compliance programs. We look for, you know, continuous improvement. And just in terms of certifications, you know, some companies, especially foreign companies, when they're involved with the DOJ and they come in for a compliance presentation, you know, they present to us ISO certifications or other certifications. You know, we don't put a lot of emphasis on those. We like to do our own analysis. So while, you know, there's a lot of certification bodies out there, at least in the United States, we don't give them a lot of weight.
Yeah, okay. Caroline, I know you were heavily involved in implementing your program several years ago. Let me ask you this. Do clients tell you they want to work with you because of your compliance regime? And similarly, do you stay away from partners who tell you they don't have the right programs in place? Is it as simple and as black and white as that?
Yes and no. I was, as you said, involved in implementing our compliance program. And I would say for us, it started with new legislation in 2012, but was accelerated by an incident that we had. So that was when we really got the muscles from management and from everyone around the company to really go for this.
But I guess, sorry to interrupt, Caroline, and we're going to talk about this in section 2 of this discussion, but that's a really good example. Something big and something dangerous needs to happen to see action, right? And that's a shame.
But then following that, having implemented and improved our compliance program a lot, we now see that there are clients who actually say they choose us because they want to work with someone who has that reputation. They want to ensure, however much you can do that, but still that you work with someone clean. And we, of course, also have this business partner program for anyone we work with. So if you're not up to accepting our terms, then I'm sorry, we will not work with you.
Yeah. Okay. And you're pretty stringent about that, are you?
Yes, and we have various actions tailored to what risk it is. So if it's high risk, of course, there are more measures, and low risk less. But we have measures for all.
Okay, Corinne, another bit on the sort of the altruism, I guess, here. You know, whether it's the right thing to do, and this comes from an audience member. Given the fallibility of human risk assessment, isn't it better to motivate business leaders to establish these programs for the right reasons, that it's good to do the right thing, it's good for the company, it's good for society at large? Corinne, it sounds wonderful, but I imagine this is something extremely hard to put in place.
In fact, I'm so sorry, but it's not so difficult, you know, due to the many settlements, DPA, fines paid by many companies. And the top management, they are also aware, and you have to train them for that, of their liability, penal responsibility, and that they could be sanctioned on their own assets, and they can go to jail in case of infraction. And we are quite helped by the recent cases. And even though they are not convinced, I think that they are convinced for themselves. It's a big incentive. But they also see that in the market, when they are competing with companies which don't have a similar compliance program, sometimes they can lose a business, but very often and more often than before, due also to the BIAC action, B20 action on towards the OECD in order to ask for better regulation, better alignment of the public procurement, for example. We have requirements, we have to show our compliance, and really they see now, I can say, that is an added value for winning business.
Yeah. A final question on this segment. Again, it comes from an audience member, and I'll direct this again, probably at you, Corinne, or you, Caroline, and it relates to SMEs, and we heard France talk a little bit about SMEs. Can increasing the business value of a company in the anticipation of selling it also be a significant driver in this space for SMEs to get their act together on the compliance processes?
I would say that definitely in mergers and acquisition, this is one of the biggest things to look at, and what we do also in my company. So yes, but I think it's more of a license to operate. I mean, you need to have it in place. If we find something we might not want to buy, so it's more the other way around, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. And would you agree with that, Corinne?
I agree with that, but I think for SMEs it's more difficult because we have also to take into consideration that the development of compliance is a cost for a company, especially nowadays. It's complicated for company and especially for SMEs to understand that is a question of survival, of sustainable growth for them, for winning also markets, new customers, but it is complicated for them.
You know, there's so many questions are coming through here, and I want to try and get to as many of them as I can. So let me just fire a final one at you, Andrew. Anti-corruption compliance programs rely heavily on sanctions. Could you speak to good practices in terms of incentives as opposed to sanctions to motivate better integrity?
Yeah, that's a great question and something we really focus on in the United States. So as I mentioned before, we have our corporate enforcement policy, and that's really focused on incentives. So one of the three main factors we look at is remediation. We also look at the compliance system, both at the time of the conduct and at the time of resolution. If a company has adequately remediated, that company can qualify for a 25 or 50% off fine on our sentencing guidelines. It may also impact what form of resolution we enter into. So we think incentives play a huge role. And we think our approach is quite nuanced to that effect. We've actually received a lot of positive feedback from companies about that.
All right, and I'm going to throw another one in actually, and I'm the person who's supposed to be keeping us on time, but I'm going to throw one more in. And again, it relates to the SMEs. And Caroline, let me ask you this: this idea that small and medium enterprises, sized enterprises, engaging in corruption feel it'll never happen to us. We're such small fish in such a big pond. Only the big cases are the ones that are really picked up and pulled out.
Yes, I agree with that. And there I think bigger companies also have a responsibility, because when you have business dealings with SMEs, that you require them to follow your code of conduct, to act in an ethical way. And of course, you cannot demand the same type of corporate compliance program from an SME as from a large corporation. But you need to see that you work in that manner, that you think it's important, and that you agree to that standard.
Okay, look, I'm going to move us on. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that first section of this discussion. We'll come to the second section in just a second after this second polling question. If we could put that up on the screen now, number 2, how many compliance programs currently implemented by companies do you think are good and effective at preventing and detecting corruption is the word that's missing on the end there. You know, have a crack at that, and we'll take a look at the results after this second round of discussion. Round 2 are issues and challenges in the implementation of anti-corruption compliance programs. We heard France talk a lot about executive commitment and the challenge that presents companies. Corinne, I'm going to start with you again, representing a business. How huge a hurdle is getting executive buy-in? If you haven't got that, can a company really make these systems and processes work?
No, definitively no. I think if you don't have the commitment from the top level as well as the middle management, that doesn't work. You will have a beautiful window dressing compliance program, but that won't work. You won't have the appropriate resources, the appropriate information. You won't be involved in the different and transverse decision-making process. And this is really the key requirements for an effective compliance program.
Yeah.
Without that, it's not possible.
And okay, Caroline, just looking at the results of the survey, 61.5% of the survey respondents say a lack of executive commitment is still a challenge. I mean, that's a huge number. If you don't have that commitment, these programs aren't going to work, as we just heard Corinne saying. Why is this message just not getting through?
Yeah, I think it's really strange because obviously it costs a lot. It's bad for your business. And in the long run, I mean, we see it really builds our business to have good compliance. So it really amazes me that 2020, this is still the case. But I know that that's where we used to be way back when, and I can see how that has come along after having an incident as we had, how that builds awareness in another way.
Yeah, let me ask you this, and again, Alma, I'll come to you in a second. But a question from an audience member: is there why isn't it as simple for a compliance officer to go to the chief financial officer or the CEO and say, look, if we put this in place, this will create value for the company. The question is there a clear and easy business and legal case to be made for compliance as an investment that creates value for the company? Surely that's as good as an argument as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Anyone, Corinne, Alma, have a crack at that. I mean, why is that message not getting through?
I think it's part of the culture to really understand that it's worth it and to have a good compliance is valuable and it helps the company to build up. It takes time. It is not easy, even when you from headquarters, they are convinced about the importance of compliance. So many times into the local operations, to bring and to raise the same awareness is completely difficult. The need of profits, the pressure to succeed on the goals, so many times give an opposite between the economic goals and the understanding that compliance can be part of profit as well. But it takes time. And of course, you need another incentives parallelly, and also you need a stricter law, local laws. You mentioned that in Colombia we had a change in the law, and I agree. It makes a change, but it's so many challenges to go forward because there are two factors that go that are very linked, key aspects with the change of the law. One, the effectiveness of the enforcement in the country. And second, the level of required, the scope and the level of required. For example, in Colombia, the only offense that was covered by the law after the bringing the legal person's responsibility for is foreign bribery, but the local bribery was left out. So I think it's a very important thing to take into account.
Yeah. Corinne, did you want to come in? Yeah, come on in.
Yeah. In fact, in addition to all what was said, and I think, for example, for SMEs, obviously, that could be a lack of resources. Also, the available guidance seems to be done for large companies. Maybe it's not customized enough for smaller companies. And of course, when you are small, you need smaller tools. So they are a little bit lost, of course, through some collective sectorial association like BIAC, like initiative in aerospace and defense. We can give some tools to the SMEs, but very often governments, authorities, they design compliance program with more and more details, but not at all appropriate for SMEs. In addition, I think they also need incentives. And if, like Sapin 2, I'm sorry for Sapin 2, but if the law is designed only with a sanction aspect, you are not rewarding, you are not incentivized. If you have the evidence of your integrity compared to other, you don't have better access to market, to public market. You have not better access, I don't know, to public financing, fundings. And I think that would be a good tools for improving or faster the implementation of compliance program in these companies and motivate the managers.
Okay. I know we talk about the different challenges in different regions and different countries, and Alma, I know you add different business sectors to that as well. Pharmaceutical sector is one of the sectors you want to talk about. Let me ask you, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. I'd like to ask you, and I'd like to ask Andrew the same thing from his perspective. Where is it working well? Which sector, which region, which country?
You asking me first?
Yeah, Alma, let me ask you first.
Well, let me give you like a little context to answer this question. While corruption in any sector is really damaging and devastating to society and to the economy, in the pharmaceutical sector, it puts the lives of the individual at risk. While in Europe and North America have stricter regulations for the pharmaceutical sector, in general, for example, in Latin America context, less strict levels of regulation remain. This is how the business role to play under a sectorial perspective takes an enormous relevance to promote the adoption of anti-corruption standards. Of course, for this to happen, an active leadership of business association, local or regional, is required. They are called to ask and require among their members the implementation of anti-corruption compliance programs, which can make a significant difference to improve the quality and effectiveness of them, as well as to make progressive advances around some of the key elements. Let me give you a sample. The issue of identifying corruption risk. It often creates a fear in companies of being recognized for irregular or illegal situations. And when the corruption risk assessment is carried out through a collective work with the participation of several companies that are members of a business organization, association, and then under a sectorial perspective, it might be easier for companies to carry out this objective, complete and periodic exercise. As a sample of models that works, let me cite you Pharma Industria from Spain and Cetipharma from Mexico. Both initiatives managed to incorporate the percentage of approximately 90% of the national market among their members. They have mechanisms to evaluate the compliance programs. And they also have channels to report wrongdoing. They have staff in charge of investigating incidents and committees to apply corrective measures. All this is a condition of entry and permanence in the association, and also is an excellent letter of introduction in the market.
All right, Alma, thank you. Andrew, I know this is a tough one really for you from where you sit. So let me ask it slightly differently. Going back to the survey, many of the companies really missing the key elements that make programs effective. 1 in 7 programs aren't based on risk assessments. Over 10% don't provide training to employees. 13% don't have any channels to report wrongdoing. I mean, astounding, some of these numbers. When you're where you're sitting and look down from there.
Very much so. And this is definitely one of the areas of the survey that shocked me. Certainly, where we sit in the United States, doing risk assessments and root cause analysis is probably the most important thing a company can do. And we've really beefed up our guidance in that area. And we found that companies have actually improved a lot in this area. I mean, I've just noticed more recently, say in the last year or two, when companies come in to make compliance presentations to us, the first thing they'll do is, put up the conduct and then they show us how they've done a root cause analysis and the specific steps they've taken for remediation. There's nothing more important that companies can do. We also expect in the United States that those risk assessments be done regularly. Because, as I mentioned before, compliance obviously is constantly evolving. The other areas, training is obviously very important. What we look for, at least in the United States, is that training is tailored both to the line of business, to the specific job of each individual. So obviously, we would expect, increased training for salespeople out in the field compared to someone who probably doesn't have those high touch points with in high risk jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. And by the way, to the viewer who's just asking for the results of the second poll, I'm going to bring you that shortly. I've got a couple more questions, and of course, the obvious one for me is the pandemic right now, and the impact that's having, the adverse impact that's having on the implementation of compliance programs. I imagine, Andrew, let me get your opinion here as well. I imagine it is having an adverse impact, but to what extent are you seeing companies, and I've got to be careful the way I phrase this, but almost using it as an excuse not to put these things in place?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and obviously one that's very relevant right now. I mean, look, we at the DOJ are very reasonable. We certainly understand the extreme compliance and financial pressures that companies are under now. We understand that companies are laying people off. I mean, but we also understand that the pandemic has created increased compliance risks. And in fact, it's almost an opportunity for companies to see how nimble they are and how they're responding to those. So certainly when companies come in, I mean, if there are reductions in headcounts, I mean, we would certainly look that the compliance reduction is not, more than in other parts of the company. But certainly, I mean, what we're seeing with companies is that they're doing more with less. And, companies they're continually coming in, and they show us kind of how many, full-time employees they have, working on compliance. And we actually take a very close look at that, not only at the number itself, but where those individuals are located. I mean, we certainly want to see compliance folks out in the field, especially in high-risk jurisdictions. So we certainly don't just look at the number of compliance people.
Sure.
We look at how they're being utilized throughout the company.
Very quickly, similar question to you, Corinne. With your BIAC hat on, what is the sense you're getting? Given the context, the pandemic context that we're in, the sense you're getting from businesses about their ability to, I guess, the extent to which they feel they are immobilized because of what's going on. You need to unmute, Corinne.
Excuse me.
There you go.
It's complicated for companies, but companies are not all in the same situation. Compliance is based on training. So if you can't train people, meet with people, carry out audits, compliance review, that is a big issue for implementing compliance to follow up the improvements. Nevertheless, if you have already developed and through Zoom, through other tools, other way to train people, to inform them, I guess that they continue to work appropriately, but it's more difficult to control what's happening. That's
okay.
true. Nevertheless, again, what I said previously, they would need maybe guidance, more clear and operational guidance from their authorities, and maybe additional resources such as for due diligence, for knowing better their customers and their suppliers, to have access to less costly resources.
And we will come on to that sort of guidance in part 3 in just a moment. Final question though to you, Caroline, and it is a question from an audience member, and I think it's a good one. Do compliance people speak the same language as business people? Is this the root of the problem here?
Yeah, I mean, it really is important that you get the message through. And I usually talk about the example. I recently went to in the beginning of the year, before all of this happened, to our Indian sub and held a compliance training there. And of course, when I talk to the Indian business people, I need to use examples that are relevant to them. Much as Andrew was indicating also that you need to, and also Alma, that you need to tailor it to the people involved. So yes, it's not too much legal language, more why is this important to you?
Yeah.
Why should you care?
All right, very good. Look, thank you very much to all of you again for responding to those questions, and thank you to our audience for your questions for round 2. Let me bring you the results of the second poll. If we could pop that one up, there you go. Let's have a look. The question, of course, was how many compliance programs are currently implemented by companies do you think are good and effective at preventing and detecting corruption? All right, most of you said less than 50% are good. I guess we shouldn't be too surprised given the skepticism we've just heard to the result of that poll. So thank you very much to that. Audience poll 3 now. Before we get to the third part of the discussion, let's put that poll up. What should be done to encourage more companies to put in place anti-corruption compliance programs? So what should be done? If you could pick one here, and again, we'll take a look at the results of that on the back of this final part of the discussion. And already from the questions that are being sent through relating to this particular issue, I'm getting a sense of where we might go with this one. So have a go at that one, and I'll start discussion round 3, which is entitled "What Businesses Want and Possible Ways Forward." So possible solutions. I guess the first question, Alma, I'll ask you this first. There is a lot of guidance, it seems to me, on anti-corruption compliance programs produced by the governments, by the US, by the UK, by the OECD, the international organizations, the OECD, the UN, the World Bank, etc., etc. But the study shows usage of this guidance isn't high. At the same time, ironically, businesses say they want more guidance. Join those dots up for me.
Yes, well, you specific ask for guidance, and I would like to bring together many comments and factors that have been already discussed with my colleagues at the panel. As per my previous comments, I would emphasize on 2 strategic ways to go forward. And it includes the guidance and the training issues. One, the sectorial perspective through the leadership of industrial association. And second, the importance of creating market and state incentives for companies to improve their anti-corruption standards. In order to demand major commitment and leadership from business associations to set up effective self-regulation schemes to improve anti-corruption standards within their members, stricter local regulations are required. It is also important to promote incentives from the government that invite and recognize companies that work seriously to have anti-corruption compliance programs. An initiative such as the Integrity Principles for the Latin American Pharmaceutical Industry, which was launched after an important consultation process in countries like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina. Those standards provide a very good set of guidance, a more practical and detailed guide to develop compliance program, as well as a guideline to build a collective action to improve business integrity for both national and multinational companies operating in the region. Now, for this effective implementation, it is necessary to have greater commitment from business leaders at the industry and its local and regional associations, as well as the interest of local governments to promote these self-regulation schemes with positive incentives. So many factors are called to bring or come together in order to make a difference in a way forward.
Okay, Alma, thank you very much indeed. Caroline, let me ask you this. Is the guidance, in your experience, easy to use, easy to find, straightforward enough to wade through, if you like, for want of a better phrase?
I would say that I don't think it is. And I think it's especially difficult for SMEs who don't have the resources and even less time and the people to follow this and to find it. So increasing awareness and making it much easier to find straightforward, adapted to various sizes, also as Corinne mentioned, would definitely help.
Mm-hmm. Corinne, what? I mean, I mentioned when I spoke to Alma just now that the private sector, you know, despite not using a lot of this guidance, says it wants more. What does it want specifically guidance on? I mean, what is it prioritizing? What is it saying it really wants?
I agree with Caroline about not maybe more focused, adapted guidance according to the size and the sector of companies, and more targeted and plain language guidance. To give an example, if you take the Annex 2 of the 2009 recommendation, OECD, for us, it's a very important source and expected practice in terms of designing an anti-corruption program. However, it falls short on details and how to design concretely effective anti-corruption compliance program. For example, how you mentioned the top from the top, how to implement it, how to motivate managers to give tips about that, how to ensure accessibility of training to information, how to apply ethics and compliance program to business partners, to suppliers, to manage communication, how to train, the tools for train, the link between compliance-driven behavior and human resources, possibility and policies. And I think that some elements in the Annex 2 2009 recommendation should be also modernized to account for the potential of using modern technology in compliance and reinforce the access, of course, to this guidance, taking into consideration of the needs a risk-based approach, which could also be fulfilled by SMEs. So not, in a summary, it's not more, but it's better, more details and more adapted guidances.
Okay, Andrew, I'll come to you in just a second on increased government commitment to fighting corruption, because this came out very strongly in this survey. But Caroline, first, another question from the audience. Can social media tools help promote anti-corruption initiatives? That's one question. Another one is, shouldn't governments be promoting ethics and compliance education courses in schools and colleges, i.e. start all this much earlier than most of us are starting it?
I think that's an excellent idea.
Are we seeing it happen anywhere?
Not to my knowledge.
Right.
Yeah.
Is it happening anywhere in the US, Andrew?
I'm probably not the right person to ask. I mean, what I will say, you know, aside from education, what we try to do in the United States is you know, put out our compliance guidance, but also go out and kind of speak about it. So you'll see a lot of conferences where myself and my colleagues, you know, talk about compliance. We talk about what we expect. We talk about changes we've made to the guidance. And just, if I could, just going back to your previous question briefly, I mean, I think that was the one thing that surprised me the most about the survey, was that, you know, companies are not using the guidance we put out. That has certainly not been my experience. I speak to a lot of CCOs, at least in the United States. Most of them tell me they have it like stapled to their computer and it's highlighted. So, you know, perhaps, you know, CCOs outside the United States are not using it. But I think certainly within the United States, it's being heavily used. I also think you'd be hard pressed to find in any area of the law such detailed guidance from a criminal enforcement authority.
Okay.
So that's how I'd come out on that.
Okay. And by the way, on education, I'm being told by someone out there that universities in the UK are putting out courses now and promoting this. So thank you for whoever sent that in. But Andrew, just staying with you, governments holding all parties to account is clearly on many people's minds. The fact that companies are prosecuted rather than executives, you know, and we all hark back to 2008. Do you agree that the focus there needs to change to send the right message?
Very much so, at least in the United States. I mean, we have prosecuted a lot of individuals, both on the supply and demand side of bribery. So I think there's, at least in the United States, a significant deterrence factor. We would love for other companies to also prosecute individuals as we are. Of course, you know, some companies, some countries are doing that now. But I also think just, you know, prosecuting both individuals and companies, it shows the business world that we're trying to do the right thing. We're focusing on all aspects of the issue. Similarly, as I mentioned before, you know, providing incentives to companies to set up compliance programs, to self-report to us, and other factors has been just a huge bonus for our enforcement program.
I don't know, a question comes in from the audience. Some countries have a very low culture of cooperation to tackle the issue of corruption, and they have limited experience in engaging with the private sector and civil society. What can be done to solve that and get those parties working more effectively together? I mean, it's a very big question, and you've got about 30 seconds to answer it. You got to, yeah, go ahead. You've got to unmute your microphone. Unmute your microphone.
Fine.
Yeah.
Collective efforts to promote anti-corruption compliance definitely might increase the impact of individual efforts, of individual actions. I would say that the definition of anti-corruption compliance policy within a business sector with the leadership of one or more of the industry associations that group and represent such markets will enhance the chances of success of the individual action based on a collective ethical management. This way, companies want to join and belong to the club of good practices and can bring other actors together from government, from civil society, from academic, to understand the model and to build together in order to replicate it in another sectors. The sectorial perspective, in my opinion, is a very key element and aspect to succeed into compliance anti-corruption perspectives.
Okay, thank you very much, Alma. Look, I've got a wary eye on the time, and I know that we've got another poll result to look at, and we will look at that in a second. In fact, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's take a look at the result of poll 3 first, and then I'm going to ask a final question to all of our participants. Let's take a look at that poll result. And by the way, apologies, you were told you could choose 3, but apparently you could only choose 1. And that is incentives. So tax incentives, rebates comes in at 21%. I don't know. I mean, is that surprising in any way? Corinne, Caroline, does that surprise you that 21% have said incentives?
No, I'm not that surprised. I would think that more enforcement action and the sentence reduction would be higher.
Yeah. How about you, Corinne?
Exactly the same. And I think, of course, I think incentive, but we don't know exactly what could be proposed as incentive is not clear enough. Nevertheless, more enforcement actions. Maybe it's also very, I'm sorry to say that, but very general what we say about enforcement action exactly. But no, more guidance is not enough, tools. It's quite well balanced, I would say.
Okay. Let me throw a final question to all of you. It's the same question. And it relates to something that France was saying when she presented the details of the report, and that is about momentum.
The recording has stopped.
Oh, apparently the recording has stopped, but hopefully we're still live. And that is about momentum. Let me start, Alma, with you. Let's get a quick 30 seconds from each of you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Now we're being recorded again. Are we, Alma, let me start with you. Are we maintaining momentum, do you think, despite the context, this very difficult context we're operating in with the pandemic now, or are we losing momentum? What do you think?
We might be losing momentum, even the difficulties may raise up. Why? Because many companies are concentrating in survival. There are extra work loads on people, and compliance has more challenge than ever.
Thank you, Alma. Andrew, how about you?
Yes. So I think, I mean, I can really only speak to it from an enforcement perspective. I can tell you our momentum has never been greater. We expect in the next year that our FCPA resolutions will be greater than in any previous year. We're operating at full speed. The only issue is kind of doing in-person interviews, but we found areas around that. So from our enforcement perspective, we have a huge wind at our backs.
Caroline, how about you? Are you hopeful that we can keep the momentum up?
No, I'm afraid I'm with Alma there. I think businesses are focusing more on survival and getting profits than compliance. I think for my own view is that we have seen a decline in incidents reported. So we're doing our best to try to make awareness still being around, being out there, reminding everyone. But yeah, I hope this will be over soon.
Okay, and Corinne, a final word from you again with your BIAC hat on, but also with the corporate hat on. What do you think? Is there any hope? Is there any glimmer of light on the horizon?
Well, I think compliance program implementation is not only linked to the current context. Companies are convinced that they have to do appropriately their business. They are, I think, aware of the potential sanctions. So I don't feel a drop or lack of willingness to be compliant and to bypass programs. The business in certain sector is really low today. So less activity, meaning also possibility of less infractions. Nevertheless, my concern, and for the BIAC, I think it's also the same, is to continue the momentum regarding the recommendation we promote in order to modernize the anti-corruption regulation, soft law environments, and efforts have to be done inside companies, entities, organizations, but also still within OECD, within all the all authorities, in order to foster appropriate guidance, as we mentioned earlier, appropriate incentive, appropriate enforcement, and to support the activities of companies in looking at also the what we call demand size of corruption. It's not only the companies, we have really to be supported by authorities and the organization of the procurement all over the world.
Okay, Corinne, thank you very much indeed. We've hit the half-past mark, so I am going to have to draw things to a close. You know, I rather than make any comments myself, we've had that wrap up from each of you. So I just really want to thank all of you, Alma, Andrew, Corinne, and Caroline, for a fascinating discussion, and thanks to the speakers before you all as well for setting the scene so well. Thank you as well to all of the audience members for sending in all those questions. Really testament to how engaged I think you all were in this fascinating discussion. We had a lot of questions. We had a lot of people responding to polls. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much from me. I look forward to the next one. Many thanks, everyone.